The metal folding chair in my apartment was uncomfortable, but I barely noticed. I'd been sitting in the same position for 40 minutes, staring at the recording equipment on my coffee table, trying to find the words to begin. The veteran sitting across from me looked just as uncomfortable, but for different reasons. Marcus Webb was 37 years old, though his eyes looked decades older. He'd contacted me 2 weeks ago with a message that was both cryptic and compelling. I need to tell someone what my commander said before he died. It's been eating me alive for 12 years, and I can't carry it alone anymore. Now he sat in my living room, hands clasped between his knees, staring at the floor like it held answers he couldn't find anywhere else. He'd been silent for the past 5 minutes, gathering courage, or maybe just trying to remember how to form the words he'd kept locked inside for so long. His name was Captain David Richardson, Marcus finally said, his voice rough. Best officer I ever served under. 38 years old, West Point graduate, 2 tours in Iraq before Afghanistan. Smart, fair, cared about his men more than he cared about his career. The kind of leader you'd follow into hell because you knew he'd get you back out. He paused, his jaw working as if chewing something bitter. We were in Helmand Province, Afghanistan, September 2012. Our company was tasked with securing a valley that intelligence said was being used as a Taliban supply route. Standard operation, nothing we hadn't done a dozen times before. Sweep the area, clear any hostiles, establish a temporary base, maintain control until the next unit rotated in. Marcus looked up at me for the first time since starting his story. Do you need to know the tactical details? The troop movements? The radio communications? All of that? I shook my head. Tell me what matters. Tell me what changed. What changed was the ambush on day 3. We'd set up in a village called Azizi Kyle, population maybe 200. Mostly farmers, herders, families trying to survive in a war zone they didn't create. Captain Richardson had us doing hearts and mind stuff, medical care for the villagers, repairs on their irrigation system, soccer with the kids. He believed if we helped them, they'd help us by providing intel on Taliban movements. But something in Marcus's expression suggested that belief had been misplaced. The attack came at dawn. Coordinated assault from 3 sides, RPGs and small arms fire. We were pinned down immediately, caught in a kill zone they'd obviously planned carefully. Captain Richardson got us organized, established defensive positions, called for air support. He was everywhere at once, directing fire, checking on wounded, keeping everyone focused despite the chaos. Marcus's hands clenched into fists. Then an RPG hit the building he was using as a command post. Direct hit. The explosion threw him 15 feet, embedded shrapnel throughout his left side and abdomen. By the time I got to him, he was bleeding out fast. Too fast. We called for medevac, but we were still taking fire. Chopper couldn't land safely. So you stayed with him, I said quietly. I stayed with him, applied pressure to the worst wounds, tried to keep him conscious, told him help was coming, even though we both knew it wasn't coming in time. The firefight was still raging around us, bullets cracking overhead, explosions shaking the building, and Captain Richardson, bleeding to death in my arms, grabbed my uniform and pulled me close. Marcus's voice dropped to barely a whisper. He said, "Webb, I need to tell you something. Something you need to know before I die, something that changes everything." And I told him to save his strength, that he'd be fine, that he could tell me later, but he wouldn't let go. He said, "No, it has to be now. You need to know the truth about why we're really here." The way Marcus said those words, heavy with meaning and dread, made my skin prickle. What did he tell you? Marcus stood abruptly and walked to my window, looking out at the street below. Normal people doing normal things. Traffic. Pedestrians. A world that had no idea what men like him carried. He told me the intelligence was fake, that there was no Taliban supply route through that valley, that our entire mission, the reason we were in Azizi Kale, the reason men were dying around us at that very moment, was based on fabricated intelligence. I felt the air leave my lungs. Fabricated by who? That's what I asked. And Captain Richardson, with maybe 5 minutes left to live, told me the rest. Marcus turned back to face me. The valley contained lithium deposits, massive ones, worth potentially billions of dollars. And there were American mining interests, contractors with connections to Defense Department officials who wanted access to those deposits. So they manufactured a Taliban threat to justify military presence in the area. I finished, understanding dawning like a sick sunrise. Exactly. Create a threat, send in troops to neutralize it, establish a base, maintain presence, and suddenly you have American military protecting American corporate interests disguised as a counter-terrorism operation. Marcus's voice was hollow. Captain Richardson had figured it out 3 days before the ambush. He'd started asking questions, requesting verification of the intelligence, pushing back on orders to extend our deployment in the area. And then conveniently, we got hit by an ambush he suspected wasn't as spontaneous as it appeared. He thought someone set you up. He didn't know for certain. Couldn't know. But he knew the intelligence had been falsified, knew there were powerful people who wanted military presence in that valley, and knew that his questioning had made him a problem. Marcus returned to his chair, sitting heavily. His last words to me, as he was bleeding out, were, "Don't let them make my death about heroism or sacrifice. I'm dying because I asked the wrong questions. Make sure someone knows that. Make sure the truth doesn't die with me." The weight of that deathbed confession was staggering. And then he died. Right there, while the firefight continued around us, bled out in my arms while I sat there trying to process what he'd just told me, trying to understand that everything we'd been told about our mission was a lie, that men were dying not to stop terrorism but to secure mining rights for corporations. "What did you do?" Marcus laughed bitterly. "What could I do? I was a sergeant, 25 years old, in the middle of a firefight, holding my dead commander while trying not to get killed myself. So I did what soldiers do. I focused on the immediate mission, survive the attack, protect my men, complete the objective. The attack lasted another 40 minutes. We held our position, air support finally arrived and drove off the attackers. Medevac choppers came in for our wounded and our dead. Captain Richardson's body was tagged and bagged like all the others, and I said nothing about what he'd told me because I was in shock, because I didn't know who to trust, because speaking up seemed like a great way to get myself killed. But the story clearly didn't end there. We held that valley for another 6 weeks. And you know what happened during that time? Contractors started showing up. Civilian mining consultants, they called themselves. Surveying the area, taking samples, meeting with local tribal leaders about mineral rights, and our new commanding officer, Captain Richardson's replacement, he facilitated it all, provided security for their operations, used our resources to support their work. And you watched it happen, knowing why you were really there. I watched it happen feeling like I was going to lose my mind. Every patrol we ran, every risk we took, every mine we swept for, every Taliban fighter we engaged, it was all in service of protecting corporate interests. The whole narrative about spreading freedom and fighting terrorism was just cover for resource extraction. Marcus's hands were shaking now, but here's the thing that's haunted me more than anything else. I started paying attention to the locals, watching their reactions to the mining consultants. And you know what I noticed? They were scared, terrified, because they knew what was coming. American companies coming in, taking their resources, leaving them with nothing. The Taliban had been brutal to them. Yes, but at least the Taliban were Afghan. This was foreigners coming to strip their land. Did you report what Captain Richardson told you? To who? My new CO, who was clearly in on it. The colonel back at base who'd approved the mission. Write a letter to my congressman explaining that my dying commander confessed a conspiracy to use the military as private security for mining corporations. Marcus shook his head. I was a 25-year-old sergeant with no proof except the word of a dead officer. Who was going to believe me? And more importantly, who was I accusing? I didn't have names, didn't have documents, didn't have anything except Captain Richardson's last words. So you stayed silent. I finished my deployment, came home, got out of the military, and spent the next 12 years trying to convince myself that maybe Captain Richardson had been wrong. Maybe he'd been confused, suffering from blood loss and trauma, seeing conspiracies that didn't exist. Maybe I'd misheard him, or misunderstood what he meant. But the way Marcus said it made clear he'd never really believed those rationalizations, except I couldn't make myself believe that. Because everything I saw during those 6 weeks after his death supported exactly what he'd said. The mining consultants, the extended deployment, the new CO's priorities, it all fit, and then years later, I started seeing news reports. He pulled out his phone and showed me a saved article from 2015. Afghanistan, sitting on mineral wealth worth billions. U.S. Geological Survey confirms massive lithium deposits in Helmand Province, perfect for battery production. Chinese and American companies competing for mining rights. Another article from 2017. Pentagon-backed mining ventures in Afghanistan facing scrutiny. Questions raised about military resources used to protect corporate interests. It was all true, everything Captain Richardson said. The minerals were there, the corporate interests were real, and the military had been used as private security dressed up as counter-terrorism operations. And 12 years later, I'm still carrying his last words, still wondering if I should have done something, still feeling like I failed him. I leaned forward. Why are you telling me this now? What changed? Marcus set his phone down and looked at me with eyes full of pain and determination. Because 2 months ago, I found out Captain Richardson had a daughter, Emily. She was 10 when he died, and she's 22 now, and she posted something on social media that destroyed me. He showed me a Facebook post, a young woman's smiling face, posting on the anniversary of her father's death. 12 years ago today, my dad died a hero in Afghanistan, fighting to keep America safe. I'm so proud to be his daughter. I know he believed in the mission and would do it again if he could. Miss you, Dad. She has no idea, Marcus said quietly. No idea that her father died questioning the mission, that his last words were about exposing a lie, that he wanted the truth told no matter what. She thinks he died believing in something noble when he actually died knowing it was all corrupt. And you want to tell her the truth? I don't know. That's why I'm here, talking to you, because I can't decide if truth is more important than the comfort of a daughter's pride in her father, if shattering her image of her dad as a hero is worth honoring his last request to make sure someone knows the truth. Marcus stood and paced my small living room. For 12 years I've carried this alone. Couldn't tell my family because how do you explain that over dinner? Couldn't tell other veterans because most of them still believe in the mission, still need to believe their service meant something noble. Couldn't tell therapists because it sounds like paranoid conspiracy theory. So I've just carried it, let it eat me alive piece by piece. What do you want to happen now? Why did you contact me? Because I'm drowning in this. Because every year on September 19th, the anniversary of Captain Richardson's death, I see Emily's posts honoring her hero father and I feel like I'm betraying him by staying silent, but I also can't bring myself to destroy her image of him. Marcus looked at me desperately. I need someone else to know. Need someone to validate that this happened, that I'm not crazy, that Captain Richardson really did tell me what he told me. I believe you, I said simply. But that doesn't solve your dilemma about Emily. No, it doesn't. But maybe talking about it will help me figure out what to do. He sat back down. Can I tell you the rest? Everything that happened after Captain Richardson died? Everything I've pieced together over the years? That's why I'm here. Tell me everything. Marcus took a deep breath and continued. After we left that valley, after our deployment ended and we rotated back stateside, I started keeping track of what happened there. Not obsessively, just paying attention. Reading news reports, following mining industry publications, watching for any mention of Helmand Province and lithium deposits. And within 2 years, there were Chinese mining operations in that exact valley. They'd negotiated with the Afghan government, paid off local tribal leaders, established infrastructure. The American mining interests that I'd seen during our deployment never got their contract. All that effort, all those lives, and in the end, Chinese companies got the lithium deposits. The irony was bitter. So American soldiers died and killed to secure mineral rights that ended up going to Chinese corporations anyway. Captain Richardson died trying to expose a conspiracy that ultimately failed even on its own corrupt terms. That's when I knew I had to do something with what he'd told me. But what? I had no documentation, no evidence, just my memory of a dying man's confession. So I started digging, filed Freedom of Information requests for mission reports from our deployment, put in requests for intelligence assessments that had justified our presence in Azedi-KL, tried to build a case. What did you find? Heavily redacted documents, mission reports that confirmed we'd been deployed to disrupt a Taliban supply route but provided no actual intelligence to support that assessment. After-action reports that mentioned the ambush but provided no analysis of how or why it occurred. Everything sanitized, nothing conclusive. Marcus pulled out a folder and handed it to me. Inside were dozens of documents, most of them with large sections blacked out. This is everything I've been able to obtain in 12 years. It's not enough to prove anything. It's barely enough to justify asking questions. But it's all I have beyond Captain Richardson's last words. I flipped through the pages. He was right. The documents raised questions but provided no answers. Did you ever try to contact other members of your unit? See if anyone else suspected what was really happening? A few. Carefully. Most of them don't want to think about it. They need to believe the mission meant something, that the friends we lost died for a real purpose. Suggesting otherwise feels like disrespecting their sacrifice. I've been called a conspiracy theorist, told I'm dishonoring Captain Richardson's memory by suggesting corruption. It's easier for everyone if they believe the official narrative, but you can't let yourself believe it. How can I? I held Captain Richardson while he bled out and told me the truth. I heard the certainty in his voice, saw the urgency in his eyes. He used his last breaths to make sure someone knew. How can I dishonor that by pretending it didn't happen? Marcus's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and his face went pale. What is it? Emily, Captain Richardson's daughter. She just tagged me in a post. He showed me his phone. Emily had posted a photo of her father in uniform, smiling at the camera. The caption read, "Looking for anyone who served with my dad, Captain David Richardson, in Afghanistan. Want to collect memories and stories for a memorial project. If you knew him, please reach out." Marcus looked like he might be sick. She's actively seeking out people who served with him, wants to hear stories, and here I am, the person who heard his last words, knowing something that would destroy the image she's building of him. You have to decide what's more important, I said gently. Captain Richardson's last request, that the truth be told, or his daughter's peace of mind believing her father died a hero. How do I decide that? How do I weigh a dying man's wishes against a daughter's need to believe her father's death meant something? Maybe you ask yourself what Captain Richardson would want, not what he asked for in his last moments, but what he would want if he could see his daughter now. Would he want her to know the truth if it destroyed her pride in him? Marcus was quiet for a long time. He loved Emily more than anything, carried her photo in his helmet, talked about her constantly, counted down days until he'd see her again. Everything he did thinking about the world he was building for her future. Then maybe his last words weren't meant for his daughter. Maybe they were meant for people like you and me, people who could carry the burden of truth so she wouldn't have to. But that feels like betraying what he asked me to do. He said make sure the truth doesn't die with him. He didn't say except for my daughter. I understood his dilemma. There was no good answer, no choice that didn't betray someone. Can I ask you something? I said. In all these years of carrying this, of researching and documenting and trying to find evidence, what were you hoping would happen? Marcus thought about that. I don't know. Maybe I hoped I'd find proof, real evidence, enough to take to journalists or investigators or someone who could actually do something with it. Maybe I hoped someone else would discover the same thing and I wouldn't have to be the one to expose it. Maybe I just hoped that by keeping the memory alive, by not letting it disappear, I was honoring Captain Richardson's request. But now Emily is actively seeking stories about her father. You have to make a decision. Engage with her or don't. There's no more delaying. I know. Marcus looked miserable, and I honestly don't know which choice is right. Do I tell her the truth her father wanted told and shatter her image of him? Do I stay silent and let her believe the comfortable lie? Do I tell her some version of the truth that honors her father's integrity without destroying her faith in the mission? What would that middle path look like? Maybe I tell her that her father died questioning whether the mission was justified, that his last words were about making sure the truth mattered more than the narrative. I could frame it as him being a man of integrity who cared more about truth than glory without specifying exactly what truth he discovered. Would that honor what he asked you to do? I don't know, maybe partially. It would let her know he died caring about truth and integrity, which is accurate. But it would leave out the specific truth he wanted told, that the whole mission was corrupt. Marcus put his head in his hands. I've spent 12 years trying to figure out what to do with this information, and now I have days, maybe hours, to decide how to respond to Emily before she thinks I'm ignoring her. What does your gut tell you? My gut tells me that Captain Richardson's last words were sacred, that when a man is dying, when he uses his final breaths to tell you something, you honor that no matter what. But my heart tells me that his daughter's well-being would have mattered more to him than exposing corruption, that if he could choose now, he'd want her to be proud of him even if that pride was based on incomplete information. Those two things don't have to be contradictory, I offered. You can honor his last words by telling the truth to people who can handle it, people like me, journalists, historians, whoever needs to know. And you can honor his love for his daughter by protecting her from details that would only cause pain without achieving anything productive. Marcus looked up. You think I should tell you everything? Make sure it's recorded and documented, but not tell Emily the specifics? I think you should do whatever lets you live with yourself. But yes, maybe there's a way to honor both his request for truth and his love for his daughter. Tell the truth to people who can do something with it, or preserve it for history. Give Emily the version of her father that would make her proud without lying to her about who he was. He was a man who questioned authority when it mattered, a leader who cared more about his men's lives than his career, an officer who died asking hard questions instead of accepting easy answers. All of that is true. I can tell her that without telling her specifically what questions he was asking or what answers he found. And that would be enough. It would have to be, because the alternative is taking his last words to my grave, which betrays him completely, or telling Emily everything and destroying her image of her father, which might betray him in a different way. Marcus stood and walked to my window again, looking out at the ordinary world. You know what the real tragedy is? Captain Richardson died trying to expose corruption that doesn't even matter anymore. Those mineral deposits are controlled by China now. The American mining interests moved on to other opportunities. The valley where he died is probably back in Taliban hands after we withdrew. His sacrifice, his willingness to ask dangerous questions changed nothing. Maybe it changed you, I suggested. Maybe it changed how you see authority and missions and the reasons we go to war. Maybe the truth he told you has value even if it didn't stop the specific corruption he discovered. Maybe. But it feels like pretty thin consolation for dying at 38, for leaving a daughter without a father, for bleeding out in a foreign country because you asked the wrong questions. Marcus turned back to me. Will you publish this? What I've told you? Do you want me to? I want Captain Richardson's last words to mean something. I want the truth he died trying to expose to exist somewhere beyond my memory. So yes, publish it. Let people know that sometimes soldiers die not because they're heroes protecting freedom, but because they're inconvenient to people with power and money. What about Emily? What will you tell her? The truth, just not all of it. I'll tell her that her father died with integrity, questioning whether the mission he'd been given was justified, caring more about his men's lives than following orders blindly. I'll tell her his last words were about making sure truth mattered more than comfortable narratives. And I'll let her fill in the details in whatever way gives her peace. That sounds like a good compromise. It's the best I can do. It honors Captain Richardson's request for truth without unnecessarily hurting his daughter. It preserves his memory as a man of integrity without requiring Emily to carry the specific burden he gave me. Marcus gathered his folder of documents and prepared to leave. "Thank you," he said, "for listening, for believing me, for helping me figure out what to do with this after 12 years of carrying it alone. What will you do now?" "I'll respond to Emily's post. I'll share memories of her father that are true and honorable, and I'll start letting go of the guilt I've carried for not doing more with what Captain Richardson told me. Because maybe telling you, making sure it's recorded and documented, is enough. Maybe that fulfills the promise I made to a dying man 12 years ago." After Marcus left, I sat with his story for a long time. A captain who died questioning a corrupt mission. A sergeant who'd carried that truth for 12 years. A daughter who'd never know the specific questions her father had asked, but would know he'd been a man who valued truth over convenience. Sometimes the truth doesn't change the world. Sometimes it just changes a few people who have the courage to listen. But maybe that's enough. Maybe that has to be enough.